My name is Sarah Garcia. I'm originally from the Chicago area, but I moved to St. Louis when I married my husband Rolando in 2014. We have a son, Emery. I was raised in the church and started going to New Life when I moved here in 2014. A story that shaped who I am today would be the events that surrounded the birth of Emery. We struggled for 4 years with infertility. The doctors gave us a less than 1% chance of having a baby. But Emery was born December 18th of 2018. Shortly after he was born, my blood pressure shot up. I had a headache that they couldn't get under control, and they finally were able to bring it down. And I was released to go home 3 days before Christmas. And I got home and ended up the next day I was back in the emergency room with another headache. So they gave me a spinal blood patch, and then they also kept me overnight for observation. But I did keep telling the nurse. That night I said, my leg hurts. I said, my leg hurts like I've been running in a race. And so she kept checking my leg and she's like, oh, it's fine. It's not red. It's not swollen. So they let me go. They discharged me on Christmas Eve. And they said, do you want to walk out or do you want to go out in a wheelchair? And something immediately, I know it was the Lord, something immediately said walk. And I thought, okay, so I told her, I said, oh, I've just had surgery. I really do probably need to just walk instead of the whole wheelchair thing. I started walking around to the elevators, and when I got to the elevator, I told my husband, I said, please go find a nurse. I don't feel good. Everything that happened after that was probably, if I not chosen to walk, would have happened in the car on the way home, somewhere where I was not close to immediate help. And all I remember is like looking down at my shoes, and that's the last thing I remember. I passed out onto my face, and when I woke up, I felt I had this doctor standing over me, and he kept trying to talk to me. And I kept hearing them say things like blood pressure, postpartum preeclampsia, blood sugar, stroke, like all these things. And so they were trying, as I'm coming to, I'm hearing them trying to figure out, like they're talking amongst themselves, like trying to figure out what's going on. And the doctor who was trying to speak to me had been up 2 floors and got into the elevator with a little boy who decided he wanted to push all the buttons. When he stopped at my floor, he found me on the floor because my husband had still run to go get a nurse, and he was trying to evaluate me for a stroke. And I found out later that he was the chief neurologist of St. Luke's Hospital, and he was the first person to find me. So I know, like, throughout this whole story, the Lord he just puts people there. So after that, they kept me in the ICU, and after a couple of days, I was able to go to a step-down unit. I kept panicking. I had panic attacks in there. I had a doctor come in who was in the ICU. He was an ICU doctor, and he was a Christian, and he said, I just want you to know that I feel like the Lord has something more for your life, because a lot of the times when this happens to people, they don't wake up. And he said, so I want you to know the Lord is not done with your life. He has something for your life. After that day, they had moved me to a step-down unit where my mom and Rolando were able to bring Emery to see me. I had to be released by multiple doctors. I was in that room for like 3 days, I think. I still kept asking people, what's gonna happen? Like, am I okay? Nobody would reassure me, like, yeah, you're gonna be fine. That was not enough for me. I needed to, I'm going home and realizing my husband has to go back to work, my mom and dad have to go back home. I'm gonna be here with this baby. I was terrified that I was going to drop dead on the floor and nobody would be there with me. I went to multiple appointments to be checked out by multiple doctors, and when I went back to the pulmonologist, who I told him at the 7-week appointment, I said, I'm just so terrified. I'm so scared. Isn't there anything we can do to check? And he told me, he said, I don't think you need another test. He said, but I will order you one more test. And if after that you still are continuing to have these problems, then I want you to see a psychiatrist, because you're going to it's going to ruin you the way that you're going right now. And I found out 2 days later that the blood clots in my legs were completely dissolved. The ones in my lungs were completely dissolved without ever having a trace of blood clots in my lungs. There was no damage to my lungs. There was no damage to my heart. They were also worried about that. Nothing. And my test results came back. There was no genetic concerns about blood clotting. And I just know that the Lord healed me before that. The next steps that got me from there to here is obviously the Lord and leaning on Him. None of this, I couldn't do anything without Him. But He also put people in my path friends like Melinda, friends like Larissa, who would sit with me in the afternoons when my husband was working, or take me to eat, or go to doctor's appointments with me and just help me with Emery, because I was still gaining my strength, but I was also dealing with this anxiety. So to have friends like that were there to just help my mind get off of what had happened was great, and also just seeking counseling. My current relationship with God probably looks better than it ever has. As I mentioned at the beginning, I was raised in the church, but kind of that old school mindset of, don't make God mad. And I've come to realize that that's not God. He loves us so much, and I'm learning to see that part, to see that side, not the fear, not the fire and brimstone God, but the loving God, the caring God, who just wants the best for us. One thing I would like all listeners to be left with would be the fact that no matter where you're at, what you're dealing with, what your mental, emotional, physical, whatever problems you're having, or problems you're not having, if you think you're in a great place, He still loves you. He just wants to be with you. He wants to have a close relationship with you, and nothing can stop Him from loving you.